Hello, my name is Ted Holsey. I'm Vice President of Marketing at eFolder and your host for today's event. Welcome to the eFolder Expert Series. This webinar series brings together leading eFolder and industry partners for technical discussions. The topic for today is 6 best practices for complete laptop protection. Today we are joined by Richard Tubb, a leading MSP industry expert and consultant. Before we go through the agenda, let's cover a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. The recorded version of the webinar will be made available on eFolder's YouTube channel. We will also make copies of the slides available to those who attended the event. With over 100 people registered for today's session, we have put all participants in listen-only mode. You can enjoy the audio portion for today's event by either streaming it to your computer or by dialing in over the phone. Questions are strongly encouraged throughout today's webinar. We have planned a special Q&A section at the end of today's discussion, but you may submit them as we go along, and we'll try to address your questions on the fly. In terms of the agenda, Richard is going to share his experience with some of the perils of laptop data protection and security. He's going to share what he has learned along the way as a user, an MSP business owner, and as a consultant on managed services, business models, and topics. Richard will walk us through the 6 best practices and considerations for any managed service provider looking to help clients completely protect their clients' mobile assets, data, and productivity. Now let me introduce our guest. Richard Tubb has worked in the IT industry for more than 15 years, working at large corporations such as Ernst & Young and the NHS, as well as being the owner of an award-winning IT managed service provider, providing outsourced IT solutions to small and medium business clients within the United Kingdom. After selling his MSP business, Richard now works providing expert advice to help IT companies who want to grow their business in a scalable and sustainable way, helping them move their business up a gear by putting together managed service offerings and pricing it correctly, getting to grips with marketing to help generate sales, and implementing internal systems and processes that encourage growth. A popular speaker at events worldwide, Richard's blog, tubblog.co.uk, provides advice and news for the owners of SMB IT businesses and has been rated as one of the top technology blogs within the UK. You can find Richard on Twitter at tubblog, or you can email him at richard@tubblog.co.uk. Welcome, Richard.
Well, thank you, Ted. What a warm introduction for me. I appreciate it.
Okay, I'll advance the slides here. Take it away, Richard.
Sure. So, well, thank you. First of all, I'm honoured that eFolder would ask me to present today. I've known Ted and the team at eFolder for many, many years, mostly from me making trips across the Atlantic to the US for conferences. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk today. And it's going to be an interesting presentation, I think, because the presentation is mainly focused around a little bit of a story of me losing my laptop computer. We'll delve into that and all the pitfalls that I found as a result of it. But very, very briefly, as Ted alluded to, I'm the former owner of a UK-based managed service provider. I grew the business from a one-man band until I sold it at the end of December 2010. And I now work with other managed service providers to help them grow their business. Today we're going to talk about laptop protection. I'm going to share my story, as I mentioned, about me losing a laptop. And based on the reaction of other MSPs I've shared this story with, you're going to see how my story could easily happen not only to your clients but to you, and how you've got an opportunity to help protect them and make money at the same time. So on screen at the moment we've got a very, very brief agenda. Now anybody who's seen me present before will know that I'm much less about the slides and much more about the conversation. So as Ted said right at the top of the hour, I really strongly encourage you to ask questions. I'll be answering questions throughout the webinar, and I've also left time at the end as well. And if you've got any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Tubblog. So if we can move the first slide forward then, Ted. So here we are, the start of the story, December 2011. I was due to present to a big user group event here in the UK to 100+ people in a very plush venue, and I was due to present about laptop protection, about data security. And about an hour before my presentation, I went to retrieve my laptop and go through, the presenter setup, and to my horror, discovered my laptop computer had gone. I scouted around the nearby tables, I looked in every conceivable location. In fact, I recruited some of the top experts in our industry to crawl underneath tables and look for my laptop, but alas, it had gone. And it wasn't just that it was a $2,000 laptop that had grown legs and walked away from me. It was the sudden, sickening horror that while my laptop was password protected, all my data and all my client data was on my laptop. Oh, and I was due to go on stage to give my presentation, but now without any slides at all. So there's a picture of me at the time. Hopefully that will give you some indication of the sort of state of mind I was in. If we can move forward, Ted. So I'm going to run through a series of lessons that I picked up while I weave them into the story. And each of those lessons is basically going to talk about the situation I found myself in and how I got out of that situation, but also the lessons that we can learn as an MSP, because I'm going to reiterate this again and again throughout. But if I found myself in this situation where I lost my laptop and some really critical data, and I consider myself quite an advanced IT user, the chances are that your clients are going to find themselves in this situation, or indeed you as IT professionals as well. So lesson number one for me was keep your data backed up. Now, I totally see the irony that I was due to give a presentation on cloud backup and data security when I'd lost all of my laptop and my data. Thankfully, though, I'd backed up my presentation to the cloud. Now, at the time, and we're rewinding here for a few years, but at the time I was using a service called Windows Live Mesh. So all of my working data, including my presentation, was synchronized to the cloud. But for any MSPs on the line, I know I've come across a number of MSPs who use these consumer products, such as Windows Live Mesh, and there's other ones out there. And I would strongly recommend deploying a business class and a channel-ready backup solution, rather than relying on a free product. eFolder, of course, the host of today's webinar, is a natural choice. There are others out there as well. But for me in that situation a couple of 3 years ago now, my presentation was on Live Mesh, and so it was simply a case of logging into the Microsoft Live Mesh webpage to download the file that I needed. Or so I thought. And if we can move forward a slide there, Ted. So although my data was actually backed up, my presentation was backed up to the cloud, I wasn't, to put it mildly, in a particularly great frame of mind. I was stressed, I was panicking, I was due to go on stage, and I didn't have my presentation in front of me. In fact, I suddenly realized that while I knew that my data was backed up to the cloud, I didn't know how to access that data through the Windows Live Mesh website. In fact, I wasn't even sure the service was called Live Mesh anymore. I knew that Windows had rebranded. Was it Live Sync? Was it Windows Sync? Honestly, I couldn't recall the name, the URL, or indeed my username and password to access that data. Now, lesson number two, know how to quickly access your backups. Thankfully, I'd made a record of all the information that I needed in a tool on my PC called KeePass, K-E-E-P-A-S-S. Now, KeePass is an open source application. Some of you might be familiar with it. For those of you who aren't, it's primarily an application to record passwords. It's an open source application. It's available on many platforms, including PC, Mac, Linux, Android, iOS, and to be honest, it's probably even available for the Commodore 64 open source package that's available across so many different platforms. The great thing about that being, I still had my smartphone with me at the time, and once I gathered my wits about me, I fired KeePass up on my smartphone and found the Live Mesh login details. It allowed me to download my slides to a USB key disk. It allowed me to borrow, I then borrowed a laptop off somebody and I delivered my presentation. And without sweating and panicking too much on stage as well. I think I hit that quite well. So once I'd come off stage, though, my thoughts did turn to my stolen laptop again. But the really key, important lesson here is it's not enough to back your data up. You've really got to know how to quickly access your data as well. And so for MSPs on the line, you might come across clients who say, yeah, we've got our data backed up to the cloud. That quite often, though, it's a token gesture on their part. They may be using a consumer-based product. They may think they've got their critical data backed up to the cloud, but don't necessarily. So there is an opportunity for MSPs here to have this conversation with your clients, and importantly to ask them, okay, can we test this? Can we have a look? Can we see what it would look like if indeed you were faced with a disaster or you'd lost some data? And it's at that point, in my experience, both as an IT professional who was in this situation and also as an MSP, that most client-organized backups fall down at this point. So you've got a really good opportunity at the very least to ask your client questions and to help them understand what they need to do in the event of disaster, but more than likely to test that backup solution, probably to find it wanting and to be having a conversation with them about a more business-grade solution, as I mentioned in lesson number 1. So Ted, I'm conscious that we may have questions here, and indeed questions from yourself as well, so please feel free to chip in if we've got any at this stage.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one question that James asks is, which do you recommend, a backup solution or a file sync solution?
That's a really good question from James, and I think my opinion is there's probably space for a mixture of both here. So in my individual case here, I'm a freelancer, so I don't particularly work from a server. I work mostly in the cloud. So I use a file sync solution to make sure that all of my data that's on my PC is also synced and backed up in the cloud. I think for most small businesses and for most businesses, especially those who use a server environment, or indeed have data spread across a number of PCs, I think a file backup solution is probably going to be better. Just from the ability, it's going to be centralized. It's going to allow you to monitor those backups. And again, it's probably a case of looking to something that's more business grade and less consumer focused. I hope that answers the question, James.
Yep.
Cool.
There's no other questions right now. Just want to remind the audience, please go ahead and use the Q&A feature in the GoToWebinar application to ask Richard questions as we go along.
No worries. I'll press on then. Lesson number 3, maintain an accurate record of your assets. So I delivered the presentation, thankfully. I'd managed to get my presentation out of the cloud, borrow a laptop and deliver it there. But of course my thoughts then turned actually to the missing hardware, to the lost hardware that had been stolen. And in the first instance I approached the venue security, told them I'd had my laptop taken. They offered to check CCTV footage. But of course at that stage, and anybody else who's ever lost any equipment, you'll get the sinking feeling and you'll know that whatever steps you take, chances are really slim that your equipment will be recovered. And I realized it was really slim that CCTV would find anything and my laptop would be recovered. I also realized, of course, that I was on the road at that point and I needed a replacement laptop quickly. So I needed to get in touch with my insurers and sort out the money so I wouldn't be out of pocket there. And of course, the first thing that the venue security suggested to me was to contact the police here in the UK. So I did, and naturally the first thing the police asked for was the make, model, serial number, and any other easy for me to say, identifiable markings on the laptop as well. Now, trust me when I say that you've probably got laptops and smartphones in front of you, and even if you hide them out of sight right now, you probably won't remember any of these details, make, model, serial number, identifiable markings. So I can tell you from experience, when you're in a situation where your laptop has gone walkabout, has been stolen, there's going to be little or no chance of you remembering all of those bits and pieces. So it's essential you make a note of them now. I fortunately did. Once again, I had all of the details of my laptop backed up in that open source package KeyPass, which is not just for passwords, you can use it for asset info and lots of other things. But interestingly, I'd also registered the device with a free website called Immobilize, IMMOBILIZE. Now, Immobilize is a site that's available in the UK. It's also available in the US, I believe. And Immobilize basically allows you to register your device details of your laptop, of your smartphone, indeed even digital cameras and things like this. The important thing being that in the event of an emergency, you've not only got your own records of your equipment, but you've essentially also got your asset register backed up in the cloud too. Now, Immobilize, one of the great features of that website, it's totally free, and certainly here in the UK, I'm probably sure it's the same in the US. The law enforcement authorities, if an item is notified as stolen, you can flag it as stolen on the website, and if it ever turns up at some point in the future, the authorities actually check the serial number, the make and model against the Immobilize database, and so there is the element that your equipment might be returned to you at some point in the future. But for my story here and now, it was important that I knew that I could log online, get the make and model, any other details, and report them to the police. And of course, when I then reported the laptop stolen to my insurance company, they asked for all of these details and more. And we'll come on to that a little bit later. But one final point here as well to do with asset inventory. I'd actually marked my laptop with my address and zip code or postcode here in the UK with an ultraviolet pen. Now, these are $3 or so off eBay. And while it may not make a difference, as I said, the authorities do check recovered stolen items. One of my clients here in the UK is actually the local police force, and they do indeed check these things. So whilst you've got that sickening feeling that you'll never get your equipment back, if you've taken these steps, if you've registered it with online databases, if you've earmarked your equipment, there's always that thought in the back of your mind that it might come back to you as a nice surprise at some point in the future. So I would encourage you to do that. Now, from an MSP's perspective, okay, I just talked about a couple of consumer products for protecting them, but from an MSP's perspective, I can almost guarantee that your clients won't have their own asset inventory. They will look to you as the IT solution provider or the MSP to keep and to maintain an asset inventory on their behalf. So there's a huge opportunity for you to actually have a conversation with your clients about their asset inventory and about what would happen if any of their equipment was stolen or was lost. How would they go about reporting it to their insurers? And a lot of this isn't actually technical in nature. It's you being organized on behalf of your client. But I can tell you from experience, having run an MSP, we often talk about moving towards becoming trusted business advisors as opposed to just the IT guy. Well, these type of things, keeping asset registers, understanding the process that your clients will make an insurance claim, that type of thing, these are the things that move you from just being seen as the IT guy by your client to indeed being seen as a trusted business advisor. So don't underestimate the value that you can add to your service to your client by taking these steps on their behalf.
Hey, Richard, a question comes to mind. What are the different capabilities for asset inventories in the various RMM packages that are out there on the market today?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think for any MSPs that are using an RMM, a remote monitoring and management product, one of the most basic features or the essential features that the RMM should have is that it will capture all of this asset information automatically. So in my instance, of course, I'm an individual. I had to capture the data, the make, the model, the serial number about my product and put it into my own database. If you're an MSP running an RMM tool, this stuff should be done for you automatically. The RMM tool should capture the make, the model, it should capture the serial number, it should capture lots and lots of other information about your product as well, and put that into a central database for you. So, this is in my opinion, Ted, this is an absolute no-brainer for any MSP out there to be maintaining an accurate record of your assets. Not just keeping it to yourself, making sure your client knows that you maintain that record for them as well.
Great, great.
Okay, so let's move forward. So lesson number 4, and I think this one's going to be known to anybody who's lost any type of equipment in the past. Your data is much, much more valuable than your hardware in nearly every case that I've ever come across. So in my instance, my laptop was reported stolen, and I'd reported it stolen to the police and to my insurer, and I was actually resigned to having to replace it. But I can tell you what the scariest thing about this situation was. The fact that I realized that anyone with a Linux boot CD and half a brain could have easily circumvented the Windows password I had on my machine and gained access to all that data. Now, I'd set up a BIOS password on my laptop, which was an added level of security. But I think just about everybody who's on the line today who's ever tinkered or done anything with PCs at all would realize is that while I thought most of my data would be safe from all but the most tech-savvy thieves, the fact is, in reality, my data could easily have been accessed by anybody who works in the IT profession. And I can tell you from experience, the fact that not only your data is compromised, but your client's data that might be on the machine as well makes you absolutely sick to the stomach. I can still remember that feeling, that horror, that terror, because as well as the personal documents I had on my machine, I had client confidential documents, financial reports, business plans, and of course at the time all that was running through my head was, how on earth am I going to broach the subject with my clients that I potentially lost their data? So at the time I didn't have any encryption on my machine at all. None of the data was encrypted. There was a BIOS password, there was a Windows password, but as any IT professional on the line will know, they're both quite easily circumvented by anybody who's got any knowledge. Today I use an open source package called TrueCrypt to encrypt my laptop. Windows 8 users can use BitLocker, and there's other packages out there on the market as well. But what it means for me is if my laptop is ever stolen or lost ever again, the data is absolutely safe. And as I said, I can tell you from experience, losing the laptop was a kick in the teeth, but thinking about the amount of client data that was on there was really, truly terrifying. Now, for any MSPs on the line, I'm somebody who's worked in the industry for many, many years. I'm very tech savvy. You can imagine if this situation has happened to me and I'm feeling sick to the stomach and terrified, your clients, it's almost certain, it's a high probability that it's going to happen to them, and they've probably not given it even as much thought as I have. They're probably going to have their own data. They're probably going to have their clients' data on the machine. And of course, probably the same for the US as here in the UK. Barely a month goes by without some sort of high-profile story of somebody leaving a laptop on a train, somebody in authority, and giving away tons and tons of information, client details. It's embarrassing. It reduces your credibility huge amounts. So this is a big opportunity for MSPs to have a conversation with their clients and not to try and sell them any solution, but to say to them, hey, do you store any of your any confidential data on your laptops? How are you going to react if you do lose that equipment? And leave it at that. Leave the client to think about that. Leave the client to discuss it and to actually run it through. Don't give them the solution immediately. Let them run it through in their head and wonder what it's going to look like. Because with that situation, instead of you having to sell something to the client is going to be banging on your door saying, you know what, since you've asked that question, I can't sleep easy at night. I don't want to let my laptop out of my sight for the fear of the sort of data that could fall into the wrong hands there, and your clients will actually approach you. So hugely important, again, to be having the conversation with them up front and saying to them, what are you going to do if your data's lost?
So Richard, a couple kind of business-oriented questions. I mean, when you were running your MSP practice, did you have clients who used full disk encryption, or that you were in a support situation where you were deploying that and managing that on the client's behalf? And if not, I mean, I know the state of the art a little bit has been changing pretty rapidly here, and the best practice is becoming more common. How how essential is it for MSPs today to be able to support whole disk encryption deployments?
Well, it's interesting. Of course, I sold my MSP probably three more years ago. I've seen a real seismic shift in the way whole disk encryption and indeed data security is taken seriously within the industry. So when I was an MSP, interestingly, Ted, the only people who ever approached us for whole disk encryption or any type of encryption at all were clients who had suffered some sort of data breach. They'd lost a laptop, or they'd lost a USB key disk, or they'd burnt stuff to CD or DVD and left that somewhere. And of course, they then had experienced the horror that I did, the absolute terror of thinking, oh, my data is, out there in the public domain. You hope beyond hope that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, but at the back of your mind, you think, it may well do. So at the time, BitLocker for Windows was probably seen as more of an enterprise technology. I think since Windows 8 has come along, BitLocker is available, to most everybody. And I see MSPs that I work with now deploying BitLocker a lot more. Mm-hmm. For clients who are using previous technologies, though, there's a whole heap of sorry, I should say for MSPs using previous technologies to Windows 8, there's a whole heap of commercial alternatives and indeed, as I said, TrueCrypt open source alternatives that you can use to actually encrypt your client's data. What it boils down to, again, though, is whether you're getting a business-grade solution. So a solution such as TrueCrypt that I use as a freelancer for a couple of my laptops is easily manageable. But if I was to multiply that by, say, a workforce of 10, 20, and then multiply that by 10, 20, 60, 100 clients, it becomes really unmanageable. So you need to look to a business-grade solution that allows you to manage lots of different clients and lots of different laptops and devices within your client systems. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, great.
Cool. Let's move on to lesson number 5. So lesson number 5, install tracking software on your mobile devices. So I've got a picture on the screen there of a smartphone. I'm going to bet 10%, at least 10% of the people on the call here today have lost their smartphone at some point or mislaid it at the very least. And of course, it's the same sort of feeling. It's resignation that, your smartphone's gone walkabout, but it's also then the horror of thinking, oh, what data is contained within that smartphone. For my story, for my laptop, there was actually a glimmer of hope. So I'd reported the laptop missing. And I actually remembered that a few weeks before I lost my laptop, I'd installed the free software Prey Project on my laptop. Now, Prey Project is, again, an open source. I beg your pardon, it's not open source, but it is a free tool. It's a cross-platform solution. It's very similar for anybody who's got an iPhone, and they may be familiar with the Find My iPhone, or anybody with an Android device who's used the Android Lost software from Google. It's very similar to that Prey Project is, but probably more powerful. What Prey Project did for me, it meant that I visited the Prey Project website and I flipped the virtual switch to notify the Prey Project website that my laptop was missing. And what this meant was that if the laptop came online, if it got an IP connection at any point, I'd be notified via the internet of the GPS coordinates, roughly, of the laptop. Indeed, I could go a step further and activate the laptop's webcam to see who was using the laptop. But most importantly of all, absolutely most importantly, I could remotely lock the laptop and prevent access to the data on it. Hugely important to me. So again, a glimmer of hope here that if anybody actually switched that laptop on and indeed connect it to the internet, I could remotely lock it and make sure that my data was absolutely safe. So Prey Project takes all of about 30 seconds to install, so I'm really glad I did install it, and it gave me a sliver of hope. Of course, the reality being that most laptops that are stolen, people are going to wipe the laptop, or at the very least they're not going to connect it to the internet, thieves this is, before they do anything with it. But if you're at all interested in the Prey Project, there's a ton of really uplifting stories on preyproject.com of how people like myself have recovered their lost and stolen devices using the software. So it's highly recommended to install it. And for MSPs on the line, again, I would be investigating the commercial solutions for tracking software, not only for smartphones, but for laptops, indeed iPads, any devices out there. Because if your device is stolen or lost, I can't tell you how reassuring is not the word, but the glimmer of hope it gives you to actually fire up a web browser and to get an idea of whereabout your laptop is. If it's been lost, the laptop will probably be in the location that you left it, and you can have a good look around for it. If the laptop or the smartphone is the other end of the country or on a train moving away from you, you can be fairly certain that it's been stolen as well. So peace of mind it gives you, but it also gives you that glimmer of hope that that you can keep track of your hardware and see what's happened to it.
Now, Rich, a couple practical questions have come in. Edgar wants to know, what if they uninstall the system before they connect it, if you've got something like Prey installed on the machine?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Edgar. And of course, my machine being a laptop, the chances of somebody actually connecting it to a wireless network that was recognized is fairly slim. So, there's, from that perspective, perhaps it wasn't as useful. But I think with a smartphone device or with a tablet device that may be connected to a 3G network, the likelihood is that you'll be able to track these devices really, really easily. So it's not a cure-all by any stretch of the imagination, but Prey Project is free software, so there's really, in my mind, there's no downside to actually getting it installed.
Yeah, there's just to make a comment, there's a fair number of examples of thieves who have taken laptops and not been aware that there's some sort of intelligent software like Prey or otherwise running on the machine, and they fire it up, the webcam comes on, you get a geographical location, you get a screen grab of what the person looks like, and hours later the police are knocking at the door. So there are a fair number of success stories even on laptops where this sort of software has been critical in recovering the asset or at least capturing the criminal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, Ted, that when I actually lost my laptop, the very next day, I was sat on the Prey Project website waiting for it to connect in and to tell me where it was. So it just gives you that little bit of reassurance that if it does come online, you're going to know where it is.
Okay. There's no more questions right now, but let me go to the next slide. Yeah.
Sure. So, and I should go back, to the slide before, just very briefly. There's no need to go back a slide there. The thing about Prey Projects as well, I said it's free. Now, I wanted this webinar or this presentation really to be on two levels. One, to really tell my story as an IT professional, because, if it can happen to me, it can easily happen to any of the IT professionals who are on the line here today. So think about your own equipment, your own personal devices, your work laptop and things like that. But of course, on a second level, think about how this is going to affect your clients as well. So Prey Project is a free tool. I believe there's a commercial a commercial version of that as well. So it's probably worth MSPs looking into it. But if you take nothing else away from today's webinar, I'd really love that you actually start thinking about the security of your own products and don't end up in the situation that I did. Thanks, Ned. Let's move on. Lesson number 6, make sure your insurance schedule is current. So as I said, I reported the laptop stolen. And I got in touch with the insurers. And now you're going to find this absolutely surprising and flabbergasting, but apparently the last thing the insurance company really truly wanted to do was to pay me out for my stolen laptop. Who could imagine such a thing? But so it was almost as though they were making it quite difficult for me to report the laptop stolen. They asked me for the police report number, which I'd obtained. They asked me for the make and model, which I had. They asked me for the serial number, which I'd got. They then asked me for purchase receipts, including details of the items such as the SSD hard drive, the memory upgrade that I'd installed, software that I'd installed on it. So it wasn't just a case of saying, hey, thank you very much, Mr. Insurer, write me a check for $2,000 so I can go and buy an equivalent. They they weren't as customer friendly as we might hope they might be. But thankfully, I'd retained all of the information that they wanted. Now, for myself, I'm a little bit OCD about such things, but I'd scanned receipts, I'd stored them electronically, I'd put them alongside my insurance details. But again, probably a lesson here, but for IT professionals and for MSPs, a detailed asset register isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity, or else expect to get very, very frustrated with your insurance company. Now, for MSPs on the line, anybody who speaks to their clients and talks to them about encryption, about device tracking, about cloud file backup, cloud storage, their clients will probably say something glibly like, my insurance will just sort that out. So it's your job as an MSP then to have the conversation and to say, well, yeah, your insurance company will cover the cost of a replacement laptop. Probably, they'll make it difficult for you. But what about the cost of the data? What about the cost of the add-ons that you bought? How confident are you that they'll actually reimburse you and not leave you out of pocket for the equipment that's been stolen or lost? And I think if you speak to any small business owner, as one small business owner to another, the insurance industry doesn't have a good reputation, and probably nowadays we expect them not to make it easy for us. I can tell you that they didn't. So it's another good way of having a conversation with your MSP client about the importance of having an asset register, and indeed what the process would look like for them if they did lose the laptop. They're going to assume the insurance company is going to wave a magic wand and make it all better. You and I know that that isn't the case. It's a different situation entirely.
Now, Richard, another question kind of comes to mind around the software tools that are available to MSPs to do this in a scalable fashion. I mean, are the RMM and PSA tools geared towards adding all this sort of extra documentation around an asset? I mean, what software is deployed where, et cetera, like you've described?
Yeah, a really good question. So I can speak from experience here. Within my MSP, we used an RMM tool that fed the basic asset information into our professional services automation tool. Some of the people on the line might have a help desk tool. They might use a PSA tool. They might even just use Excel spreadsheets. Whatever it is, your RMM tool will feed the basic information across. What I mean by that is probably the make and the model, and probably the serial number. But for me, for my MSP, within our PSA tool, that information was stored as a configuration or an asset item there. We then enhanced that asset item with things such as if we'd purchased the hardware on behalf of the client, we would attach the receipt as a scanned PDF to that configuration item as well. We would even take photographs of the equipment and attach those as a file attachment to the asset as well. So again, from a scalable point of view, from an MSP's point of view, whilst the RMM tool will do the basic asset information for you, there's a lot of value that you can add by recording additional information. By being a little bit OCD, as I mentioned, by attaching the information that's really important to the insurance company. It's receipts, photographs, any other document or details that might be applicable as well.
Great, great.
Cool. So in summary, really, in my story there, from losing the laptop an hour before I was due to get up on stage, for me, it was a case of the lesson to be learnt was keep your data backed up. There's commercial, or I should say there is consumer services out there such as Dropbox, Live Mesh, or whatever Microsoft are calling it this week, and they'll do a job at a basic level. But really, they're not fit for purpose for businesses. And as an MSP, I would strongly encourage you to be looking for business-grade backup solutions and business-grade sync solutions for your clients as well. As we said, know how to quickly access your backups. I used KeePass. LastPass is another consumer alternative that's out there. But for you as an MSP, you need to understand that you need to keep asset information, I beg your pardon, keep details of backups and how your clients can easily access those backups in an emergency. Because if they do need to access those backups, they're going to turn to you and you're going to need to provide that information really, really quickly. Maintain an asset register. Ted and I have talked extensively about how you can use an RMM tool there, but at the very basics, keep a detail of the make, the model, and the serial number as well. For the IT professionals on the line, for yourselves, I'd strongly encourage you to register your items with Immobilize, the website. It's a free website. It's used by the authorities to try to look for stolen equipment, so there's absolutely no downside to doing it. And as I mentioned in the earlier slide, it's a really good way of keeping almost a backup of your asset details in the cloud. Again, for $3 from eBay, there's no downside to UV, ultraviolet marking your equipment with your address and zip code. And in fact, MSPs, there's really no excuse for you not doing that for your clients as well. You'd be surprised at how much equipment gets recovered by the police by using those UV markings. Set a device lock. Really simple advice here, but how many of us have got devices where there's no PIN number or password on the device? It's free, it's easy to set up. Encourage your clients to do it. Set a device lock, and it's just one level of security against when devices get lost or stolen, one extra level of security against the data falling into the wrong hands. But I can't emphasize enough here, encrypt your data. Use, as an individual, use TrueCrypt. As an MSP, look into using BitLocker or one of the commercial alternatives on the market here. The hardware has a certain cost to it, but the data is almost always by far in excess in cost of the actual data of the hardware that you're going to lose. And the horror of losing client data can't be underestimated. Speak to your clients about how they would react if they lost some of their critical data. Install tracking software. We've talked about Pro Project. On the Apple, you've got Find My iPhone. On Google devices, you've got Android Lost. These are free solutions, and trust me when I say you will kick yourself if your device gets lost next week and you've been putting off installing this software on. So look into it there. For MSPs, also investigate commercial alternatives, the way you can track your clients' devices and help them to recover lost equipment. And finally, in summary, ensure your insurance schedule is current. Scan receipts and store them electronically. If you're an MSP, make sure that your RMM tool is keeping your asset register up to date, but enhance that asset register with any and all documents that you can attach to those configurations. So we'll move
Richard,
on to...
I guess,
yeah, please go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, just question about, I mean, we've talked a lot about, protecting the assets and the data and the value. What do you recommend in terms of, because it's closely aligned with this, in terms of what kind of security most of these mobile devices and laptops need?
That's a really good one, isn't it? And I think one, back in the day, and it's funny, I see less and less of this around the small business area now, but we used to use devices such as the Kensington locks. Most PCs come with, Kensington lock holders or slots on them. And again, that's a few dollars. Get those put in and you can be keeping the devices locked down. It's also worth, from the MSP's perspective, blog articles that can be written, white papers, even including it in a posted newsletter, details of what people should do to keep track of their own devices, what not to do, I walked. Funny enough, Ted, I was walking down the street the other day, and I should know better than this. I take my Kindle e-reader wherever I go. And I got it in my back pocket, and an older lady walked up to me and she tapped me on the shoulder and she said, "Excuse me, I hope you don't think I'm interfering, but my son had his Kindle taken out of his back pocket and I noticed that you were doing it." She said, "Why don't you put it in your front pocket instead? And it's a lot more difficult for people to take." So I really thanked that lady for giving me that advice. But it's interesting. Sometimes we make assumptions it will never happen to us. It's important that we are the ones who are seen to be giving the advice to our clients to help them understand, the reality of the world out there and how they can protect themselves and their devices.
Now let's. I just want to remind everybody, we've got a couple more minutes for questions. Great opportunity to spend some more time with Richard. My question would be, Richard, in working with MSPs, I mean, you travel the globe talking to MSPs on both sides of the Atlantic and beyond. What kind of grade would you give most MSPs in terms of capitalizing on this as a business opportunity?
On a scale of 1 to 10, probably a 2. And it makes my it makes my heart sink to say that, Ted. It really does. I think the reality is, nearly everybody on the call will probably agree that security is quite low in the list of priorities to our SMB clients. Unfortunately, it seems to be, while we as IT professionals are aware of it, it tends to be quite low on the list of priorities for us as well. We all assume it will never happen to us. So as I said, the one thing I'd like everybody to take from today's webinar is, well, at the very least, you need to be protecting your own equipment and data. But you can clearly see the opportunity is here for MSPs to be having the conversation with clients and to be raising these questions. And it's really important for 2 reasons. One, there's a really lucrative opportunity here. I mean, there's companies such as yourself, Ted, with eFolder doing a phenomenal job of making it really easy for MSPs to back up their clients' data and to help secure them. But secondly, I've talked a couple of times about how a lot of MSPs almost get irritated that they're perceived as just being the IT guys by their clients. But the reality, of course, if we just talk about technology all the time, if we just are there to fix things for people, we are going to be perceived as the IT guys. There's an opportunity, if you have this conversation about security, if you talk to them about, okay, how's it going to look if you lose this data, you do build up trust. And you're seen as being somebody who's there who's not just talking tech, but talking in business terms to them. So not talking about encryption, but talking about the impact on their business if they lost client data, that type of thing. So I think, unfortunately, I'd give it a 2 out of 10 at the moment. I really hope that the MSPs who are on the call today, it gives them food for thought, and they start thinking about how they can help their client's business and how they can make money for themselves doing this as well.
Yeah, and I think an observation, I agree. I hope it's not, you may be a tough grader giving a 2 out of 10. I hope it's not that low, but it's somewhere down there. And I think, to me, the thing that's impressive as you were going through today's presentation is the multiple layers of defense and protection that you recommended, which are all, starts with protect yourself and protect your own assets, protect your own data, protect your own livelihood. But, it shows, I think we often hear when we're talking to MSPs about how the markets get very commoditized, how it's hard to differentiate, how margins are under pressure. But I think what you showed today is there's, 6 to 10 different ways that an MSP could layer and differerentiate a endpoint laptop defense strategy for a client, all the way down to, appending all of those receipts for software and peripherals and everything else added on, to that asset so that it's properly protected in case of an insurance loss. I mean, these are ways for an MSP to fully differentiate the offering and or have, a good, better, best, or gold, silver, gold, platinum type offering, because you can, the clients that are most fastidious and have the nicest budgets will maybe do everything, but somebody is willing to do half of these steps, and you could still extract really meaningful managed service revenue by doing even half of these steps for the client.
I think probably it's a really good point, Ted, and one of the things that I've observed as well is the most successful MSPs who are doing these, undertaking these sort of activities for their clients, or at least asking the questions. Once these services get sold in there, the MSP tends to become very, very sticky with the clients. And what I mean by that is it's quite easy for SMBs to shop around and say, we want to move our IT guy, we'll move our IT support services. But once you start adding these different layers of services on top, SMBs tend to think twice, because they think, well, you know, Dave just doesn't do just the IT for us. He also advises us on our security. He also does our data backup for us. He also does our encryption for us. So it's really important from the MSP's perspective to get these services in there as well, because as well as making it, as well as helping your client, you're making yourself sticky with them.
Great. Okay, final call for any final questions. Okay.
Perhaps move on to the next slide, and I'll wrap up my story here, because I know anybody who's gripped and thinking, well, what did he do? Well, there is actually a happy ending to the story of my lost laptop. So a few days after the laptop was stolen, I was actually travelling in Utrecht in the Netherlands just to give a presentation in Europe. And I received an email from a lovely lady called Jo Flood, and Jo said the title of the email was, "Are you missing a laptop?" Well, you can imagine I was quite interested in opening that email. The email went on to explain how the lady Jo worked for a company in London who had run a student event at the same venue I was presenting at. And actually what she explained was, while she was sorting out the equipment that she brought back from the venue, she'd spotted that they'd accidentally acquired an additional laptop. Interestingly, what Jo had then done is, when she powered the laptop up, she'd spotted my name on the logon screen. She'd then Googled my name, and me being an avid blogger, I'd blogged about speaking at the Autotask events, and it had actually come up as the first hit in the Google search engine for that. So Jo put 2 and 2 together. She found my email address through the blog. She got in touch to see if it was my laptop. Exchanged a couple of emails with her, and a few days later I was reunited with my laptop. So I think, Ted, there might be something in this social media lark. I can't put my finger on it, but I think there might be we might be onto a winner, these Twitter people and everything. So
step number 7: start a blog.
Social media presence. And I think if you could just forward to the next slide, Ted. Just one final overview, really. As I said, I think the message I would give, if this can happen to me, I mean, Ted, you very kindly introduced me as an industry expert, so by all rights I should be absolutely mortified and embarrassed and not share this story at all. But I share this story because if I'm an industry expert and I know my way around IT and it's happened to me, then do you think there's a chance it can happen to your clients? Now think about the words I've used to describe this whole process for me. Horror, sinking feeling, sickening, embarrassment, panic, frustration, anger. Think about how you would feel as an IT professional if you lost your equipment and whether this might happen to you. We all like to think these things won't happen to us, but it did happen to me. Now granted, it had an happy ending, the laptop came back to me, but you can be sure I've taken my own advice. All of my devices have got device locks. All of my devices are encrypted and have got backup. I never, ever, ever want to find myself in that situation again. If I ever lost my laptop again, sure, it would be frustrating, but I wouldn't lie awake of a night worrying about the embarrassment of having to tell my clients that their data had potentially been lost. So my first piece of advice would be the old phrase, eat your own dog food, or the phrase I much prefer, drink your own champagne. Protect yourself and your own data, because it's really embarrassing to have to explain to clients that you've had your laptop lost and data on it. But secondly, have a conversation with your clients. Ask them what they'd do if they lost their devices. Ask them what they'd do if their employees lost their devices. And this is a really important conversation to have with them. I can almost guarantee they haven't thought about this, or if they have thought about it, they simply don't want to think about it. So it's your job as a trusted business advisor to help them think about it. And once they start thinking about their devices, once they start thinking about their IT, once they get it, they'll start to understand the wider picture. They'll start to talk to you about perimeter security. They'll talk to you about off-site backup. They'll begin to realize how much they rely on technology and how precarious their situation is. So for me, that's all the slides. I hope everybody on the call has found it useful today. One, at the very least, they can have a little laugh at the sheer terror I was in before going onto stage, giving a presentation that I no longer owned. But on a serious note, I hope it's given you food for thought. I hope you go away and use the free tools that I've mentioned to protect yourself. But more importantly, I hope you see the revenue opportunities for speaking to your clients about things as well.
Okay. Well, Richard, thank you very much for joining us today. This was another eFolder Expert Series webinar, and this is Ted Hulsey signing off. Thank you very much for everyone for joining us. Take care.